The Favero Assioma PRO MX is clearly the best pedal power meter system for gravel bikes, better than the SRM X Power and the Garmin Rally, both of which are more expensive than the Favero system. Often, when testing bikes and gear, the product is pretty similar, and what is quote-unquote best comes down to a lot of nuance and personal opinion. And typically, the more you spend, the better performance you get. Here, none of that is the case. I've tested a single pair of Pro MX pedals for a year on all sorts of gravel bikes in all sorts of conditions. I've tested a few pairs of the SRM X Power on a few different bikes, had some issues. And I've tested this and every single iteration of the power meter pedals that Garmin has had going back to the original road models. I've ridden a power meter of some sort for 25 years or so, going back to the trusty old PowerTap. I'll keep this video short and sweet, tell you why I prefer this, show some comparative power meter data for this, and tell you about some problems I've had with the SRM and the Garmin models. Please take a second to subscribe, that helps me out. Now let's dig into it. Putting a power meter in a pedal is kind of a big ask. You're asking it to do two things well in a confined and often abused space. Let's talk about the power part first, then we'll talk about the pedal part. On the power measurement front, all three do a good job. SRM is the OG. Uli Schrober created the original power meter back in '86, and for many years that was the only option out there, and it remained the gold standard for a number of years among professionals, including, the Garmin sponsor riders who, while paid to ride Garmin power meter pedals, were often using the SRM Spider-based system. So SRM deserves some credit. And these X-Power pedals, when working, provided good data, but they were super fussy to set up and I had to send them back a couple times for issues. The Garmin meters are getting much better than they were years ago when they had a big battery pod dangling off the side. This is still a battery system, whereas the other two are rechargeable batteries. Each company makes its own claims for why their style is better. The little batteries are certainly easier to find on the road than, say, the dedicated SRM charger, which when it breaks, as mine did, you can only get these things from SRM. Also makes the body a little bit bigger, but in terms of power measurement, I found these to be in line with other meters that I tested. I don't have a dog in the fight of replaceable batteries versus rechargeable systems. As I said, it's a lot easier to find these than it is to find these. I went into the Favero test with a bit of a negative impression, however, of the cables, in addition to being cumbersome and just one more thing to forget when you're traveling. When pieces break, then you're left out in the cold. So I had a negative bias coming into this test. However, Favero system works well. USB on one side, and then two clips snap onto the pedals, which blink reassuringly to let you know that the system is charging. Knock on wood, I have not had any problems with these, and I've yet to forget to bring these when traveling. Now let's talk about power comparisons against other meters. Here in the Delaney garage, I use a kicker as one source of power measurement at the back, and then I used a dual-sided 4-eye crank, the latest and greatest from that, to test against the Assioma PRO MX. In short, pedals track well. How do you know who's telling the truth? Testing power meters is like democracy. It's not a great system, but it's the best that we have. And even if all three systems agree, they could all be agreeing about the wrong thing, right? But that's what we have to go on. So what I found was that the kicker, which in turn I found to track nicely with quarks and stages and other meters, tracked very closely with the Favero, or vice versa, however you want to see it. In short, I found the Favero quite trustworthy and reliable and consistent. So the Favero summary thus far: it has a reliable charging mechanism and the power meter measurement is reliable. Yeah? Check, check. Now let's talk about the pedal's number one job, being a pedal, letting you get in when you want to and letting you get out when you want to, and not confusing the two. For reference, my default pedal system is Shimano. I have used Shimano mountain bike pedals since the dawn of time. I've got a whole host of mostly XT pedals, maybe one Schwenke XTR set. Compared to that, Garmin Rally comes up short. For one, it's big, it's thick, For two, more critically, while getting in is easy enough, I have popped out on a few times, especially like pedaling hard over washboard when I certainly did not want to. And then there's a little bit of the cleat float inside the pedal. And yes, I use both Shimano cleats, right? But then I also use the cleats that came with the Rally, still had the same issue. So not a big fan. SRM, much closer to an XT in terms of look and feel. It's a much shorter stack height. This is certainly the lightest of the bunch. And you can get in when you want, clip out when you want with no insecure gray middle zone. Similarly, Assioma MX feels like a good Shimano pedal. It's a little bit heavier than a Shimano pedal with no power meter inside. It's a little bit heavier than the X Power. I don't feel that when I'm pedaling. What I do feel is security. In, out, no lousy gray middle ground. As I mentioned, I've tested these in all sorts of conditions. I was in the sleet and snow in Texas a couple weeks ago. They don't seem to be affected by temperature. All these claim to have built-in temperature compensation. Power has been good, functionality has been good. They're just easy to live with. This is what you want in a pedal. Now let's talk price. Depends on where you live, of course. I'm going to give the US numbers. The pedals you can get in single-sided power measurement or dual-sided across the board here. Assioma Pro MX, $800 for the dual or $525 for the single. SRM, a cool $1,500. You can get 6 body colors, so that's nice. But again, $800 for a dual, $1,500 for a dual. And then the Garmin Rally XC200, list price is at $1,200. Times being what they are, we're seeing prices fluctuate and sales fluctuate, but as of release date, that's what these prices are, and you can get single-sided systems for cheaper. I'll put a link below to where you can purchase this if you're in the US at Bike Tires Direct. I'm a big fan of those guys up in Oregon, and then I'll put a link for those of you in the rest of the world straight to Favero's site. If you're a fan of Shimano shoes, like I am, I'm happy to say Shimano supports me with footwear and eyewear. You can save 10% on Bike Tires Direct with the code down below. Unfortunately, can't save that 10% on the pedals, but you can get those there. As far as single-sided versus double-sided, I think single-sided is fine. I have for years used a Stages GRX left-sided power meter model because Shimano does not make a power meter for the GRX crank system. Chris Froome trained for and won the Tour de France on multiple occasions using a single-sided power meter, so works just fine, but it is nice to have the left-right data, especially if you're coming back from injury. What do you do with that data if you're not injured? You can get into the weeds and obsess, but you've got options here. Now don't get me wrong, I'm still an advocate of having a power meter as a separate device, either at the spider or the crank, and the pedal just to have one job, as to be a pedal. That said, often you can't get such a setup for gravel bikes. SRM has not one, but 2 excellent options with Quarks that can come built into SRM cranksets. Shimano GRX, as I mentioned, does not have a native power meter, nor does Campy's Ekar gravel group. So many of you have asked me over the years what a good power meter pedal system is, and I'm happy to say we now know. 4 conclusions about the Favero Assioma Pro MX. It is a good, reliable power meter. It is a good, reliable pedal. Charging is reliable, and of these 3 systems, it's the cheapest. As I mentioned at the top of the video, often trying to determine what the best is pretty fuzzy and the differences are small. Here, there's no comparison. If you want a good power meter pedal system for your gravel bike, the Favero Assioma Pro MX is your best bet. Thanks for watching. Let me know what questions you have. I will do my best to answer them in the comments below, and I'll put links down in the video description to these things and my favorite Shimano shoes. Thanks for watching, and whatever system you enjoy, even if you don't want to ride with power, heaven forbid, just get out there and enjoy the ride.